Hey, I'm Demon Dev, and I'm thinking about giving some general ideas on how I approach productivity, get stuff done on my project. I think I have some unusual ideas that could be helpful for some people, or just helpful to react to and find what works for you. So I believe really strongly in two kind of working modes: the planning mind and the working mode, the planning mind and the working mind. And what I mean by that is basically, so let's take a big game project. Maybe you want to work on a multi-year game project. I think that's really cool. In order to get started, you have to decide what you're going to work on, what you're going to do, and then you have to, spend the time doing it. So, in my opinion, doing the job, like once you've committed or designed out sort of what the type of things you need to get done, whether it's making character art or programming some movement, um, once you've decided what you're going to kind of go for, the working mind is in a lot of ways a lot funner place to be. It's more time demanding, I think, in a lot of cases. You're going to spend a lot more time working on stuff than designing, just partially because you're designing in a black box a lot of the time. Even when you're adjusting current features, you can, take a screenshot, you can circle things and be like, oh, this should be faster, should be slower. But there's almost sadly a limited amount of time you can spend designing because there's only so many ideas you can have before you have to test something. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult, even with full analysis, logicking out whatever you can. Will this be fun? Will this not be fun? I think kind of the tried and true method that most people find themselves coming back to time and time again is trial and error. You have some clever ideas about something, and then you go try it and see how it feels at the end. So, anyways, there's a useful benefit to considering these two kind of working modes as separate ideas. The planning mind, I would say, is a more high anxiety mindset, especially I would say for programmers, but probably for artists too. Deciding how something should be. Should this character have a big weapon, a small weapon? Should they move fast or slow? Should this have a long cooldown? Should this, there's infinitely many design decisions, and some of them so small that you won't believe how long it takes you to decide on one way, and then you end up doing it and doing it the other way. So, the best advice I can give on that front is to try not to overly is try not to over design just in terms of thinking you can know ahead of time how things are going to pan out. Have your ideas, put your time into design, and then try and do quick mock-ups. And I mean, like really quick mock-ups, both in art and code. Gray boxing is a common idea, and I also respect sometimes gray boxing isn't enough to know how things will feel. So you should give yourself a lot of leeway in how much time you can put into certain features just to test whether they're viable for being fun or not, whether having a grapple attack is going to work or not. But at some point you have to reflect on that and go back to designing again. Like, okay, so I did this, did it work? But focusing on the mindsets for a moment, when you're in working mode, I find it to be a little bit higher stress. You're thinking in terms of the the ramifications of how long it'll take to create some things. If you're thinking about an inventory system, the way you structure it, whether you're going to have stackable objects or not. Sometimes changes down the line will be not too time consuming, but usually that's a iterative process. So the first couple changes are not too expensive, but then you more and more changes, and then you've changed it to the point where it's a little bit clunky, but it works. And clunky could mean that it's a little bit glitchy and you intend to get back to it, or it totally works, but the code is hard to interact with. And so then you come back to it a couple weeks or months later, and working with it again is really difficult. And that tends to be when making design changes are hard, but sometimes necessary. I think the thing that a lot of people get caught up in any project, not just game dev, but I'm gonna stay focused in game dev because that's what I know best. I think within game dev, people end up finding themselves on a march towards feeling more and more aggressively. I don't even know if this is the term, but completionist. And by that I mean you just get so frustrated with the churn and burn of starting and stopping and redoing and throwing out incredible amounts of work um, for a new way of doing things, only to realize that you like that even less than the last way. There's a couple ideas I think that are worth knowing ahead of time, such as that new ideas are often worse than old ideas for all sorts of bizarre reasons. There's certain reasons why the game industry falls into certain paradigms of things, which is frustrating as a creative because a lot of times your favorite ideas are the ideas that set you apart or make you different from other games. And I love those ideas. And I think you should treasure them. But it's an uphill battle, and that's part of what makes the process so exciting is, what are the odds that in contrast with like all other game developers would have created or stumbled onto something that is really good and different than everyone else, and that's a really exciting thing. It's a gold rush kind of a thing, where all the ways you can do mechanics in any genre, whether it's RPG, shooter, or multiplayer, or um, MMO, farming. There's so many types of games that invite all sorts of insane ideas, and it may or may not be helpful to know ahead of time that those ideas, the craziest, the most unique or clever ideas, are probably going to need a lot of tinkering in order to be a true improvement on older systems. And I don't even know. I mean, what's the point of knowing ahead of time that something is hard? Everyone's already telling you that all the time. I remember being very frustrated when people would tell me to not work on such big projects. And there are pros and cons, although I think a lot of it is projection. People remember their own big projects, their own first project, from high school or college or after college, or, even just, on the side from a day job. People remember their own big projects and how torturous it can be to love your ideas and designs and do like, some increment, like 10% of the project and be like, wow, I could make everything. Um, and then it not work out for one reason or another. Sometimes your flexible time changes. Sometimes your passion for the project changes. Sometimes your passion doesn't change and you don't know exactly what has happened. I think that's something that I'd love to touch on in future videos for anyone that's interested in my thoughts on that. But a lot of people continue to love the big, dream project that matters to them, but they find themselves paralyzed to move forward. They open the project and they don't do anything for, days, weeks, years. And I want to respect that process. People give themselves a really hard time for that, but I think that it's important to respect how difficult it is to work on a project that you love. I think the well is poisoned by people who don't either have the time, the flexibility to spend time on hobby projects. Not all hobbies are equally casually interactable. Is a mouthful way to say is some dream projects. If you have a dream project or if you have something that you want to play around with until it becomes a dream, um, not all projects are easy to spend 10 minutes a day on or 30 minutes or an hour a day. Sometimes that's really punishing. With a lot of projects, you end up repeating the same kind of introductory steps of launching programs and scrolling over documents, and that can be really tough. So I want to give those people, more respect, but also warn the rest of us that, again, regardless of whether you feel like you're making progress, that are, still opening the project files, they're still going towards like a big goal that matters. Doesn't have to be big. I just find big stuff exciting, but people who are going towards some sort of something that's important to them, remember that the well is a little bit poisoned because people are very frustrated with their own endeavors, and not always in a toxic way, but often what people want is they want people to succeed in a way that they feel like they were unable to, or was impossible for them to do. And so it was a waste of time, or worse than a waste of time, to spend significant portions of their life pursuing those projects. And I have a bit of a bone to pick with those people. I think, it's the veterans teaching in college or watching over game jams, or, working on their casual project, that tells newcomers, hey, maybe, work on something a little bit smaller first. There's nothing wrong with working on a small project, but usually that's said in response to somebody wanting to work on a big project. And I think that should be celebrated just as much as a small completable. All projects are completable, but as a small project, because it's not ultimately about the game being finished. It's ultimately, in my opinion, about working on what's important to you. Because if you continue to work on what's important to you, you will discover the knowledge that tells you what you need to do in order to make the game project finished. So your initial vision is most useful as a motivator and like a shot in the dark, but in the right direction of where you need to be to achieve whatever's important to you. So if someone gets into working on games and they really love Grand Theft Auto and they want to make a game in that genre, there's a knee jerk reaction of a lot of people that are more veterans in the kind of indie game dev scene to be like, well, don't do that. Which is insane because they probably did the exact same thing when they first started out. Um, I certainly, I think one of my first Blender game engine projects was a first person shooter or something. Um, Most of the time, the core design, the story, is a lot less important than just the desire to go and create something and see how that feels and what parts you like or don't like. So try not to get over fixated. And this is a comment to the veteran developers, I suppose. Try not to get over fixated on what's important to you now. There's a expert syndrome effect that happens where you acquire a lot of experience, but also a lot of baggage. And you think that you know how to live your life, if you were to live your life again as a upstart developer, or just, hobby project doer, you think you know the better way to have gone about things. And certainly from the game project files aspect, if you had known the way to write the script the first time, that probably would be a lot better. But what you may not be appreciating, what I see a lot of people not appreciating from the veteran side, is the limited weight that you can accept when you're starting something new. Getting into game dev is very frustrating. I'm not sure if it stops being frustrating, but maybe you begin to achieve such fun things, such internally rewarding things that you feel like it's more of like an even fight sometimes. But starting with any new skill is really challenging, and you may feel like you are being a little bit tricky, a little sneaky or mischievous if you allow someone to have the idea that they will achieve this dream project while also believing to yourself, maybe knowing, if you're feeling very cocky, you may know that they'll never do this project. And your enlightened view of the world is like, well, I have to tell them, hey, you, person ooh, this is like your first game jam, or first time opening Blender or Unity or Unreal Engine. Hey, you're not going to be able to make this game, so don't. uh, which I think is the wrong way to interact with those people. I think the right way to interact with people is to let them know that that's awesome, that whatever ability that they have to conceive of these ideas is matched by the motivation to pursue those ideas and bring them to life as best as they can. And yes, it's technically possible that they could do that game project, but even more inspiring, along the way of trying to do something that's important to them, they may discover a different type of game, maybe a completely different project, or maybe a spin-off of that project, or maybe they'll just enjoy one aspect of game development. God knows there's many. Maybe they'll just enjoy one aspect so much that that they'll just want to do that thing, and they'll team up with other people and be useful or productive in that way, and maybe that's what's really meaningful for them. So trying to save people from their big projects is is you being dumb. Sorry, veterans. I know you may have had a big project that you tried and felt like was a failure because it didn't get to completion, or halfway through working on it you lost the passion. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't work on big projects, even from the get go. There's plenty of arguments in both directions. Small, completable projects are great for a lot of reasons. They, inspire confidence in teammates that you want to collaborate with. The small projects do. They give you really useful tools on seeing how long things take. But sometimes, if you want to work on something else, that can be a little bit soul crushing or demoralizing. Okay, yeah, you can make a platformer, base game, or a Flappy Bird, to see, can I do it? Yes, I can. But there's not very much creative expression. That's training, that's drilling exercises, which is great for some people and not great for others. I think in my experience, most of what drives people into game development is not skill training. Uh, the skill training in other fields of programming and art are probably more intense and financially rewarding. I think what drives people into game development most of the time, super sweeping generalizations, please forgive me. I think what drives people into game development is recognizing a special kind of creativity that they can express in the field. And I think that's really, really awesome. And I think you should hesitate when you try to bring what you think is reality against the pure innocence of starting up on game dev. It turned into much less a rant about staying productive or orienting game dev, and more into something about how not to treat new game devs. But that's a process that, if you can accept about other people, maybe you'll be kinder to yourself as well. I think all of us that are trying to make a game project know, just as there's a knowledge about AAA and how tough most of the industry is to work in as a quality of life thing, and many other factors. People also know about indie game development, on that it's just hard and it takes a lot of time. And even if you put everything into it, maybe it won't work out. Although certainly it's such a individual personal process that in many ways statistics are less relevant for the wild west of indie game dev than anywhere else, maybe. But maybe if you can accept that you can allow new people to work on, to you, crazy huge scope projects, maybe you can forgive yourself for working on your big project. And maybe you can look at them and be like, okay, well, you know this person has made something that's super glitchy in a lot of ways, but they brought together so many elements. Maybe they've learned something about collaborating large teams, or the effective work of large teams. If you work on a big project, you're typically working with a lot of art assets. and a lot of mechanics or AI behavior or weapon systems or crafting systems, you may be doing a bad job at literally everything, but maybe that is teaching you something about organizing that level of complexity. So maybe your actual mechanics are terrible, but and for earlier on projects, I hope. But even for veterans, maybe your mechanics are terrible, but they all work together. Maybe they're all sitting in the same scripts folder, and you can see how it could be better the next time, or on how you could iterate that project itself. I think we should question our completionist tilt as a culture of developers. If there is a monolithic culture, probably not. Um, but maybe big projects are cool, and maybe a project being completed isn't the only variable. And I don't know if anyone actually thinks that, but a lot of what we say is oriented that way. Is we're like, well, will you be able to do this? And like, man, is anybody able to do even a simple project and make money with it? It's the that's not the most important element to consider. And for a lot of people, it's more of a passion hobby than it is a money thing. I think star status and money is amazing, and I think that people should believe in that as much as they want to, um, against all the odds. I mean, where else were you gonna win the lottery and make $1 million? Why not for the ideas that you find to be most important to you in such a creative discipline? I think that's awesome, and I think we should encourage people to um, to love that as well. All right, thank you. I'll talk to you again soon, and maybe next time it'll be more about motivation and less about reducing toxicity.